such a vagabond who plods along the road, left to his own meditations. Vote 1D. These men had fallen into a line of thought which really seemed to him entertaining. He had naturally been thinking of his rat traps, and suddenly he had been struck by the idea that the whole world. See, I can't do this continuously, man. I feel like my normal voice will just break in between. Okay. Normally, okay, okay. Struck by the idea that the whole world about him, the whole world about with its land and seas, its cities and villages, was nothing but a big rat trap. It had never existed for any other purpose than to set baits for people. It offered riches and joys, shelter and food, heat and clothing, exactly as the rat trap offered cheese and pork, and as soon as anyone let himself be tempted to touch the bait, it closed on him. And then everything came to an end. The world had, of course, never been very kind to him, so it gave him unwanted joy to think ill of it in this way. It became a cherished pastime of his during many dreary ploddings to think of people he knew who had themselves be caught in the dangerous snare, and of course others who were still circling around the bait. One dark evening, as he was trudging along the road, he caught sight of a little grey cottage by the roadside, and he knocked on the door to ask shelter for the night. Nor was he refused. Instead of the sour faces which ordinarily met him, the owner, who was an old man without wife or child, was happy to get someone to talk in his loneliness. Immediately he put the porridge pot on fire and gave him supper. Then he carved off such a big slice from his tobacco roll that was enough for both the stranger's pipe and his own. Finally, he got out an old pack of cards and played Mojolis with his guests until bedtime. The old man was just as generous with his confidences as with his porridge and tobacco. The guest was informed at once that in his days of prosperity his host had been a crofter at the Ramso in ironworks and had worked on the land. Now he was no longer able to do lay labor. It was his cow which supported him. Akash. Yes, that Bossy was extraordinary. She could give milk for the creamery every day, and last month he had received all of 30 kronor in payment. He calls his cow Bossy. Maybe this is why he doesn't have a wife and a child. Okay. Oh, my eyes. Okay. The stranger must have seemed incredulous, for the old man got up and went to the window, took down a leather pouch which hung on a nail in the very window frame, and picked out three wrinkled 10 kronor bills. These he held up before the eyes of his guest, nodded unknowingly, and then stuffed them back into the pouch. The next day both men got up in good season. The crofter was in a hurry to milk his cow, Bossy, and the other man probably thought he should not stay in bed when the head of the house had gotten up. They left the cottage at the same time. The crofter locked the door and put the key in his locket. The man with the rat trap said good-bye and thank you, and thereupon we each went his way. But half an hour later the rat trap peddler stood again before the door. He did not try to get in, however. He only went up to the window, smashed the pane, stuck in his hand, and got hold of the pouch with the 30 kronor. He took the money and thrust into his own pocket. Then he hung the leather pouch very carefully back into its place and went away. As he walked along with the money in his pocket, he felt quite pleased with his smartness. He realized, of course, that at first he dared not continue on the public highway, but must turn off the road into the woods. During the first hours this caused him no difficulty. Later in the day it became worse for him, for it was a big and confusing forest which he had gotten into. He tried to be sure to walk in a definite direction, but the paths twisted back and forth so strangely. He walked and walked without coming to the end of the wood, and finally he realized that he had only been walking around in the same part of the forest. All at once he recalled his thoughts about the world and the rat trap. Now his own turn had come. He had let himself be fooled by a bait and had been caught. The whole forest with its trunks and branches, its thickets and fallen logs closed in upon him like an impenetrable prison from which he could never escape. It was late in December. Darkness was already descending over the forest. This increased the danger and also increased his gloom and despair. Finally he saw no way out, and he sank down on the ground, tired to death, thinking that his last moment had come. But just as he laid his head on the ground, he heard a sound, a hard, irregular thumping. There was no doubt as to what it was. There, he raised himself. Those are the hammer strokes from an iron mill, he thought. There must be people nearby. He summoned all his strength, got up, and staggered in the direction of the sound. The Ramsau ironworks, which are now closed, were not so long ago a large plant with smelter, rolling mill, and forge. In the summer time long lines of heavily loaded barges and scows slid down the canal which led to a large inland lake, and in the winter time the roads near the mill were black from all the coal dust which drifted down from the big charcoal crates. During one of the long dark evenings just before Christmas, the master smith and his helper sat in the dark forge near the furnace waiting for the pig iron which had been put in the fire to be ready to put on the anvil. Every now and then one of them would go up to stir the glowing mass with a long iron bar, returning in a few minutes dripping with perspiration, though, as was the custom, he wore nothing but a long shirt and a pair of wooden shoes. All the time there was many sounds to be heard in the forge. The
Unental,
big bellows groaned, and the burning coal
Unental.
cracked. The fire boy shuffled corn into the maw of the
I
furnace
don't
with
know.
a great deal of chatter. Outside roared the waterfall, and a sharp north wind whipped the rain against the brick tiled roof. It was probably on account of all this noise that the blacksmith did not notice that a man had opened the gate and entered the forge, until he stood up close to the furnace. Surely it was nothing unusual for poor vagabonds without any better shelter for the night to be attracted to the forge by the glow of light, which escaped through the sooty panes, and to come in to warm themselves in front of the fire. The blacksmith glanced only casually and indifferently at the intruder. He looked the way the people of his type usually did, with a long beard, dirty, ragged, and with a bunch of rat traps dangling on his chest. He asked permission to stay, and the master blacksmith nodded with a haughty consent, without honoring him with a single word. The tramp did not say anything either. He had not come there to talk, but only to warm himself and sleep. In those days the Ramsau Iron Hill was owned by a very prominent ironmaster whose greatest ambition was to ship out good iron to the market. He watched both night and day to see that the works was done well, and at this very moment he came into the forge on one of his nightly rounds of inspection. Naturally, the first thing he saw was the tall ragamuffin who had eased his way so close to the furnace that steam rose from his wet rags. The ironmaster did not follow the examples of the blacksmith, who had hardly deigned to look at the stranger. He walked close up to him, looked over him very carefully, then tore off his slouch hat to get a better view of his face. "But of course it's you, Nils Olof," he said. "How do you look?" The man with the rat traps had never seen the ironmaster at Ramsor, and did not even know what his name was. But it occurred to him that if the fine gentleman thought he was an old acquaintance, he might perhaps throw him a couple of kroner. Therefore he did not want to undeceive him all at once. "Yes, God knows things have gone downhill with me," he said. "You should not have resigned from the regiment," said the ironmaster. "That was a mistake. If only I had still been in service at the time, it would have never happened. Well, now, of course, you will come home with me, to go up along to the manor, and to be received by the owner like an old regimental comrade." That, however, did not please the tramp. "No, I couldn't think of it," he said, looking quite alarmed. He thought of the 30 kroner. To go up to the manor house would be like throwing himself voluntarily into the lion's den. He only wanted a chance to sleep here in the forge, and then sneak away as inconspicuously as possible. The ironmaster assumed that he felt embarrassed because of his miserable clothing. "Please don't think that I have such a fine home that you cannot show yourself there," he said. "Elizabeth is dead, as you may have already heard. My boys are abroad, and there is no one home except my oldest daughter and myself. We were just saying that it was too bad we didn't have any company for Christmas. Now come along with me and help us make the Christmas food disappear a little faster." But the stranger said no, and again no, and the ironmaster saw that, and that he must have, and no, but the ironmaster saw that he must give in. 1 second. It looks as though Captain Von Stahle preferred to stay with you tonight, Sturgeon he said to the master blacksmith, and turned on his heel. But he laughed to himself as he went away, and the blacksmith who knew him understood very well that he had not said his last word. It was it was not more than half an hour before they heard the sound of the carriage wheels outside the forge, and a new guest came in. But this time it was not the ironmaster. He had sent his daughter, apparently hoping that she would have better powers of persuasion than he himself. She entered, followed by a valet, carrying on his arm a big fur coat. She was not at all pretty, but seemed modest and shy. In the forge, everything was just as it had been early morning. The master blacksmith and his apprentice still sat on their bench, and the iron and the and, no, and iron and charcoal still glowed in the furnace. The stranger had stretched himself out on the floor and lay. No, actually, why are you recording this? Actually, I'm nine. You can go ahead. Do I go back to funny voice for some time? Okay. mm,
Hmm.
Stretched himself out on the floor and lay with a piece of pig iron under his head and his hat pulled over down over his eyes. As soon as the young girl caught sight of him, she went up and lifted his hat. This is so romantic. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye open. The man was evidently used to sleeping with one eye open. He jumped up abruptly and seemed to be quite frightened. "My name is Isla Wilmanson," said the young girl. "My father came home and said that you my father my oh shit. My father let me try some other accent actually. I'm gonna try Mallu. My appa came home and said that you wanted to sleep here in the forest tonight. Actually, I can't do that. And I asked permission to come and bring you home to us. I'm so sorry, Captain, that you are having such a hard time." She looked at him compassionately with her heavy eyes, and then she noticed that the man was afraid. Either he has stolen something, or else he has escaped from jail, she thought, and added quickly, "You may be sure, Captain, that you will be allowed to leave us just as freely you came. Only please stay with us over Christmas Eve." She said this in such a friendly manner that the rat trap peddler must have felt confidence in her. "It would have never occurred to me that you would bother me with yourself, miss. I will come at once." He accepted the fur coat which the valet handed him with a deep bow, threw it over his rags, and followed the young lady out the carriage without granting the astonished blacksmith so much as a glance. But while he was riding up to the manor house, he had evil forebodings. "Why the devil did I take that fellow's money?" he thought. "Now I'm sitting in a trap and will never get out of it." The next day was Christmas Eve, and when the ironmaster came into the dining room for breakfast, he probably thought with satisfaction of his old regimental comrade whom he had run across so unexpectedly. "First of all, we must see that he gets a little flesh on his bone." He gets a little flesh on his bone, Noel. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Where were we? Hmm, okay. He said this to his daughter. Okay, who was busy at the table. "First of all, we see that he gets a little flesh to his bones," he said to his daughter, who was busy at the table, "and then we must see that he gets something else to do than to run around the country selling rat traps. It is queer. I don't know how to say that. It's queer, queer, queer. It's queer that things have gone downhill with him as badly as that," said the daughter. "Last night I did not think there was anything about him to show that he had once been an educated man." "You must have patience, my little girl," said the father. "As soon as he gets cleaned and dressed up, you will see something different. Last night he was naturally embarrassed. The tramp manners will fall away from him with the damp clothes. Just as he said this, the door opened and the stranger entered. Yes, now he was truly clean and well dressed. The valet had bathed him, cut his hair, and shaved him. Moreover, he was dressed in a good-looking suit of clothes which belonged to the ironmaster. He wore a white shirt and starched collar and whole new shoes. What's that noise? Okay. But although his but although his guest was now so well groomed, the what is that noise? Although his guest was now so well groomed, the ironmaster did not seem pleased. He looked at him with a puckered brow, and it was easy to understand that when he had seen the strange fellow in the uncertain reflection from the furnace, he might have made a mistake. But now that he stood in front of him in broad daylight, it was impossible to mistake him for an old acquaintance. "What does this mean?" he thundered. The stranger made no attempt to dissimulate. He saw that at once that the splendor had come to an end. "It is not my fault, sir," he said. "I never pretended to be anything but a poor trader, and I pleaded and begged to be allowed to stay in the forge. But no harm has been done. At worst, I can put on my rags and go away." "Well," the ironmaster said, hesitating a little, "it was not quite honest either, you must admit that, and I should not be surprised if the sheriff would like to have something to say in the matter." The tramp took a step forward and struck the table with his fist. "Now I'm going to tell you, Mr. Ironmaster, how things are," he said. "The whole world is nothing but a big rat trap. All the good things that I offer to you are nothing but cheese rings and bits of pork set out to drag a poor fellow into trouble. And if the sheriff comes now and locks me up for this, then you, Mr. Ironmaster, must remember that a day may come when you yourself may want to get a huge piece of pork, and then you will get caught in the trap." The ironmaster began to laugh. "That was not so badly said, my good fellow friend. Perhaps we should let the sheriff alone on Christmas Eve, but now get out of here as fast as you can." But just as the man was opening the door, the daughter said, "I think he ought to stay with us today. I don't want him to go." And with that she went and closed the door. "What in the world are you doing?" said the father. The daughter stood there quite embarrassed. She's in love with him, and hardly knew what to answer. That morning she had felt so happy when she thought how homelike and Christmassy she was going to make things to the poor hungry wretch. She could not get away from the idea all at once, and that was why she had interceded for the vagabond. "I'm thinking if this stranger here," said the young girl. "He walks and walks and walks the whole year long, and there is probably not a single place in the whole country where he is welcome and can feel at home. Wherever he turns he is chased away. Always he is afraid of being arrested and cross-examined. I should like him to have and to enjoy a day of peace with us here, just one in the whole year." The ironmaster mumbled something in his beard. He could not bring himself to oppose her. "It was all a mistake, of course," she continued, "but anyway, I don't think we ought to chase away a human being whom we have asked to come here, and to whom we have promised Christmas cheer." "You do preach worse than you parson," said the ironmaster. "I only hope you won't have to regret this." The young girl took the stranger by hand and led him up to the table. "Now sit down and eat. Wait, are you going right now? Or will you go in 3 minutes? Oh, you have to go in. Oh, Wi-Fi will go in 3 minutes. Okay, there's more. Okay, I'm gonna wrap now for 2 minutes. Uh, It was all a mistake, of course, she continued. "But anyways, I don't think we have to chase away a human being whom we have asked to come here and to whom we have promised Christmas tree. Only priest, the first, and the parson's plan master. Only hope, only hope we won't have to regret this." The young girl took the stranger by hand, led him to the table. "Now sit down and eat." She said. She could only see the father had given the man with the rat trap said not a word. He only sat down and helped himself to the food. Time after time, he looked at the young girl who had interceded for him. He's a sin. Why had she done it? Why could she be crazy? What was a crazy idea? After that Christmas, he had answered past his father always had the stranger did not cause any trouble because he did nothing but sleep the whole night. He lay on the sofa in one of the guest rooms and slept on one side.